Today we're going to be installing these HEL steel braided hoses onto the R6 in an attempt to make it faster by making it slower. It seems counterproductive, but it will be a huge gain. But anyway, let's start off this video like every other video with a quote from Gandhi. There is more to life than increasing its speed. That doesn't sound right, but it's on the packaging here, so it must be. But anyway, if you've got a very good eye, you'll notice that there are only 2 hoses here, not 3. And that is because I'm such a little kid that I couldn't even wait for this video to install the rear brake line. So recently the brakes on the R6, especially on the front brakes, they haven't been very good, and I suspect that is due to 2 things. The first thing is there's probably air in the system, but because I've been wanting steel braided hoses for so long, I've been putting off bleeding them until I got the hoses in. And secondly, I think it might be due to the fact that these bikes come standard with rubber brake hoses, and after 10 years they're probably starting to perish. The fact that these bikes came with rubber hoses from the factory has always been a controversial topic, and it's not even just because it's from 2008. I believe that even the latest generation of R6 still comes with rubber hoses. You wouldn't expect a sport bike like this to come with rubber hoses, but nevertheless it's not a difficult thing to change and it's not that expensive. So that is why I am doing it today. But the problem with rubber hoses is that over time they start to perish, they start to weaken. So you expect all the pressure that you put on that lever to be transferred straight to your calipers and pressing against your disc. But what happens with rubber is that it can stretch. So some of that pressure is being lost as the rubber expands. And over time it obviously wears and can expand even more. So especially like a decade later, I think they're probably at their worst. And when I got the bike and changed the brake fluid, I think that probably sped up the process. It washed some of the sediment out, and that is why currently it is feeling so bad. So these are now HEL's steel braided hoses. And the cool thing about steel is that it doesn't expand or bend like rubber. It holds its shape. So if you look up closely, if I can get the camera to focus on it. Okay, let's look at the back hose instead because it's just not focusing. But now that it's focused, through the transparent red outer coating, you can actually see the steel braiding inside of it. So HEL make these hoses in a variety of colors, in solid colors and in these transparent outer coatings. So I have gone with this transparent red to match the R6, and transparent so that you can actually see the steel braiding inside. Because if you're gonna have steel braided hoses, you may as well be able to see it, in my opinion. But they look awesome on the back. And my second favorite part, look at the old banjo bolts versus the new ones. They are miles apart. These look almost green. It looks terrible. And these are just amazing with their copper looking washers. As I said, I couldn't wait to do the back one. And this is what it looks like. So those are the first 2 reasons why you would want to put steel braided lines on your bike. They look awesome and none of the pressure you put on the lever is lost. And the third reason is how the line layouts work. So the way the line setup works from the factory is it comes from the master cylinder in a single line. If you have a look here, I don't know if you can really see. So this is where it connects to the master cylinder in a single line. That single line comes down here by your radiator next to your horn. And there's a T that splits it into 2 lines because obviously this has 2 discs on the front, which means 2 calipers. So the line splits into 2 and divides the brake fluid or pressure into each caliper, and then there's 1 line to each caliper. Now the new system is a little bit different and they advertise it to be how race bikes work. So here there are just 2 lines that go straight from the master cylinder to each caliper. Supposedly it's more efficient and it should have better braking feel and all of this stuff. I don't know how true it is. My brakes have always been pretty good on the R6, but I think it's a good way to do it and it'll be nice to try and feel the difference. The first thing that we need to do to start putting the new lines on is to drain the old lines to take them off. So I've got a container with a tube that I can connect to the bleed nipple, and I'm going to drain it like you usually bleed brakes with your 8mm spanner. but without filling up the reservoir. So we're going to build pressure, crack the nipple, which will let the brake fluid out into my container, and we just won't refill it. So eventually it'll empty the lines so that we can unbolt them and take them off. And there you have it. The reservoir is empty. I've bled it from the master cylinder and there's just air coming out. I've done the right caliper and I've done the left caliper. So that is pretty much all the brake fluid that I can get out of it. So hopefully when I take the lines off, not too much ends up on the bike, because you should always be careful when working with brake fluid. Cover your tank or any paint, because if it does get on it, it can eat your paint and damage it. Okay, so we're halfway through the boring part. The next step is to take these lines off. It's a fairly simple process. You're simply going to undo the banjo bolt at the master cylinder, undo the banjo bolt on each caliper, and because it is mounted up here as well, we're going to have to undo that bolt there, and as far as I know, that should be enough to get them off. And lastly, this is what a brakeless R6 looks like. I think it would be pretty fun to go for a ride right now, but it would probably end badly. So there was more brake fluid left in the lines than I expected, so there was quite a bit of it coming out when I undid the bolts, but it's fine. I mopped it up with a cloth. And how ugly are these lines that join the color? There is wear in it, the way the shape changes all the way along. These have been cracking. They just look awful. So it's definitely time for some fresh ones, and that's what gets to come now. So now we get to do the opposite and put these gorgeous lines on. Look how stunning these fittings are. So basically at the master cylinder, we're going to have them stacked like that. We've got a longer banjo bolt here to be able to handle two stacked up like that. So we're going to have a crush washer at the top of the bolt, one in between the two fittings, and then one at the end of the bolt. So these are beautiful copper looking crush washers. So their job, being called a crush washer, is exactly that. As you tighten it down, they should crush and create a perfect seal. The other ends of these goes on to the caliper there, and again, two crush washers per banjo bolt and a shorter banjo bolt. And now for the worst part of the job, in my opinion, and that is bleeding the brake system from dry. The reason I hate this so much is because when we rebuilt the brakes on the Project R1, we bled them from dry and they just never built pressure. We found out later that the seals in the master cylinder were perished, and that was why, but at the time we didn't know that, and it was just a horrible task. However, I did do it on the back brake and it went smoothly, so I'm hoping the front goes just as smoothly. So we've got our fresh brake fluid, and let's see how quickly we can do this.
Those are ridiculously good. Those are just amazing. I can't believe how big of a difference that is. the first time I braked on the new lines, I grabbed a handful of brakes like I usually would in an emergency situation or wanting to stop really hard, and they are just so strong, and I didn't realize it until I let go of the brake lever and the back wheel hit the ground. They are so good that the back wheel actually came off the ground. You know, you don't realize it when they degrade over time. When you ride it every day, you don't realize how any part of your bike can degrade until you fix it. And before you leave rude comments, I am making sure no one's behind me before I get a handful. You know how everyone loves to accelerate, but no one enjoys braking? I think I just changed that. Like, braking is my weak point. I suck at braking, especially on a racetrack. It's just tiresome and it's hard work. But now it's fun. So if you have a 10-year-old motorbike or anywhere around there with rubber hoses and your brakes are starting to feel less than amazing, maybe it's time to change your hoses.
But anyway, that is pretty much it for the install of HEL steel braided hoses onto my 2008 Yamaha R6, and I couldn't be more happy with how this turned out. And that is pretty much the whole process. The only thing left to do is, in a few days after a few rides, once all the air bubbles in the system have been shook up to the top of the system, I will bleed it for a final time. But for this video, that is pretty much it. And if your brakes are feeling bad whatsoever, I can definitely recommend this. It turned out way better than I expected. I knew there'd be gains, but to this extent, I had no idea. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Let me know what we should do to the R6 next down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.